What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the Necromancer Healer. So like I mentioned in all my previous build videos for this patch, not much has changed for any sort of build between Dragonhold and Harrowstorm. There are a few tweaks here and there to a couple of builds to better optimize them, but for the most part, anything you saw from the Dragonhold build video for a Necromancer Healer will translate over to the Harrowstorm build that we have here today. So again, not much has changed. The new sets that were introduced really didn't change anything. They didn't really get their way into their meta. There were no real balance changes to any of the skills for Necromancers that really stood out as changing what a Necromancer healer's goals would be, or any healer goals really. So with all that said and done, we're going to go ahead and get started with this build video. As a reminder, we will not be going over any sort of gear. That is reserved for the healer gear video, which should be popping up in the upper right hand corner right about now. So if you're interested in knowing what gear you should be running as a healer, check out that video. I also cover things like race, what food to use, attribute distributions, things like that in that video as well. This build video is strictly going to be taking a look at skills that you should be running, when you should be running them, and then we're also going to have a kind of brief discussion about healing in ESO and what sets Necromancer healers apart from the other classes. So we're going to get started with the Restoration Staff bar. This is a front bar here. We have Illustrious Healing, so we are using the Master's Restoration Staff, so obviously we want to use Illustrious Healing. But even if we are not running the Master's Restoration Staff, if we're using a different staff or another unique arena staff, we're still going to want to run Illustrious Healing. It's a fairly good heal over time ability, a hot. It lasts for 12 seconds and also covers a very wide radius as well. It's 8 meters wide on the radius, so it actually covers a pretty good area. So having Illustrious Healing down is very beneficial. A lot of healing in endgame trials is just sort of layering down your heal over time abilities to kind of cover your DPS when they do take the damage that's incoming. Next we have Combat Prayer. This acts as an AoE burst heal, along with a consistent source of Minor Berserk. While there are other sources of Minor Berserk, this is probably going to be one of the more consistent ways to apply it. So Combat Prayer is really going to be your main healing ability that you're running here, mainly because you're trying to maintain that Minor Berserk buff. Next we have our class burst heal, which is Blood Sacrifice. Now there is a little bit of a downside of running Blood Sacrifice, and that's the fact that it applies Minor Defile to you, so that reduces the healing received by 15%. Not that big of a deal. Minor Defile is not a huge hit, plus typically speaking you shouldn't be taking a ton of damage, and it only lasts for 4 seconds, so it's not terrible. It's not a bad debuff to have. It's very similar to Healthy Offering on a Nightblade healer, where yes, there is a cost associated with it, but the cost itself is sort of it's not really that big of a cost. I would say the Minor Defile is definitely worse than the health sacrifice you got to make to use Healthy Offering, but again, it's not that big of a downside to running Blood Sacrifice. If you have a corpse nearby, then you will also be able to heal a second target for the same amount of health. So this does act as a double heal, double burst heal, if you have a corpse nearby. Then we have Energy Orb, tried and true bread and butter for any sort of healer in ESO, giving the very high healing done per second. It is definitely a hot you want to have out at all times. Plus you get the Combustion Synergy, which provides additional resources to your group, which is always going to be beneficial for DPS as well as for tanks. Then we have Necrotic Potency, and this is going to get us a ton of ultimates. So Necromancer support roles, tanks and healers, one of their main goals is to just generate as much ultimate as possible by using Necrotic Potency. You have several abilities that will be able to generate corpses for you, so you're able to make use of Necrotic Potency. So definitely an ability that I would recommend slotting in order to really play to the Necromancer's strength. Then for ultimate we have Reviving Barrier, but there are a few other options you could consider. Going to our back bar, which is our Destruction Staff bar, we have Elemental Drain for the Minor Magicka Steal and the Major Reach. You might not necessarily need to run this. A tank could run it, or your other healer could run it, so you can flex this out as needed. Then we have Blockade of Storms to help proc your enchant on the back bar, as well as maintain off-balance uptime. Then we have Avid Boneyard. You could also go with the other morph, which is Unnerving Boneyard. Unnerving gives you the AoE Major Breach and Major Fracture, which can be very beneficial in trash pulls. Avid Boneyard just allows you to activate the synergy, so I would recommend going with Unnerving Boneyard if you have the opportunity to do so. This is mainly used for the Grave Robber synergy. So one thing I do recommend paying attention to is the center of the cast, because the synergy does originate from the center of the AoE, so you can't activate it from the edge of the AoE, for example. So just be mindful of how you're placing it. You kind of want to center it on whoever is running Alkosh, or center it on your DPS so they're able to grab that synergy there. This can be flexed out, but because it's a unique synergy to the Necromancers, I don't recommend flexing it out because it just helps maintain good Alkosh and Lakestes uptimes. Next we have Intensive Mender. So this basically has two roles. The first role is that it generates a corpse when it dies. So you're able to use this for your burst heal to get the secondary effect going, or to get Necrotic Potency going. And obviously the second part is the heal. It's actually a pretty strong heal, about 7k health every 2 seconds. So really, really nice here. And it does smart heal, so it does target the lowest health ally around you. So definitely a good ability to roll onto and use. And now the corpse that it creates is after it runs out, so after 8 seconds, or if you reactivate it early, you need to have at least 4 seconds done before you can reactivate it early, and it'll create a corpse. Then this last slot is what I like to call the flex spot. You can put in a number of different abilities here. I have Agony Totem for the minor protection to you and your allies. It does have a fear associated with it, so be careful in trash fights because it can mess up tank stacks, because fear is a hard CC now. For those of you guys who are just returning, they did change fear, so it is a hard CC. So just be very careful of when you use Agony Totem in trash fights. Make sure that your tank doesn't necessarily get mad at you for fearing enemies before he has a chance to chain them in. The other addition to Agony Totem is the Pure Agony synergy, which is a unique synergy to Necromancers, and it just applies minor vulnerability to enemies within the AoE. So nice way to apply AoE, minor vulnerability, if you don't have a Nightblade that's able to run Lotus Fan. And because it is a unique synergy, it also helps out your DPS who are running Lakestes to get higher Lakestes uptime. So pretty good move here, but again, this is a flex spot, so you can flex this out as needed. And then finally, we have Aggressive Warhorn for the major force buff. Now let's go over a couple of alternative abilities to run. Running Glacial Colossus could be useful particularly in 4-man content, or in content where you already have plenty of Warhorn uptime. Where you're going to mostly use this is going to be in groups with not many Necromancers, so like 1 or 2 Necromancers, and that's just to help out with the major vulnerability uptime. You are giving up Warhorn, but sometimes the major vulnerability is going to be better if you have 3 Warhorns that are already on rotation. Nothing else here is really beneficial. Mystic Siphon could be used to restore Magicka if you need it, but it does require a corpse to use, so not particularly useful because you're not really running Blastbones at all, so you won't really be able to target anything. Only corpse that you make consistently is going to be from Intensive Mender, which is right next to you, which isn't a bad spot to be. So if you want to, you could run Mystic Siphon, but just don't anticipate being able to deal any damage to it, because chances are the corpse is going to be next to you rather than next to the boss. Under the Bone Tyrant line, I do recommend taking a look at not Beckoning Armor necessarily, but Summoner's Armor, just because it creates a corpse. It does also give you Major Resolve, which is nice for your survivability. But definitely try to avoid Beckoning Armor because that does chain things in. You don't necessarily want to chain things in because that might kill you. So you do want to go with Summoner's Armor instead. Now, like I mentioned with Intensive Mender, if you activate the ability after 10 seconds, so half the duration, you will generate the corpse. So you can run Summoner's Armor and use it every 10 seconds in order to generate the corpse, or you can let it run completely out after 20 seconds to generate the corpse instead. It's up to you kind of how you want to do that. Under the Living Death line, Renewing Undeath is an AoE heal, which could be useful. It's not going to give you as strong of a burst heal as Blood Sacrifices. You can see here it's about a 3k difference in health, but it does heal multiple people. So if you need an AoE burst heal, then you might want to consider running Renewing Undeath instead. Now you can run the other morph, which is Enduring Undeath, rather than Renewing Undeath. So they both have different effects once you consume the corpse. So for Renewing Undeath, when you consume a corpse, then you can remove negative effects off of people, so it basically acts as a purge. Enduring Undeath ends up increasing the duration of the heal over time. So both of them will give you the heal over time if you consume a corpse, but Enduring Undeath will increase the duration of the heal over time, depending on how many corpses you're absorbing. For boss fights, generally speaking, you might not have that many corpses appearing, so during Undeath the additional duration might not be beneficial, but renewing Undeath, the removal of negative effects might also be fairly niche, because not all boss fights have debuffs that you can cleanse, but both of them are mainly going to be used for the burst heal rather than the extra effect that you get from consuming a corpse. Then you have either Braided Tether or Mortal Coil. So either of them are fine. Mortal Coil restores stamina to you, which could be beneficial. Braided Tether gives you an aura as well, so you don't necessarily need the corpse to be next to you or the DPS group stack. Instead, you can just target any corpse and it'll heal everybody around you instead. So that might be a little bit better, but it does require a corpse, so kind of same limitations as Mystic Siphon. So just be mindful before you use it. I personally don't usually recommend running Braided Tether because of that necessity of having a corpse active. You're going to want to save those corpses to use Necrotic Potency on. Under the Destro Staff line, consider picking up Crushing Shock for ranged interrupt. If you're running Zens, you might want to consider picking up Destructive Reach for that dot. Under the Resto Staff line, you have Radiating Regeneration, which is really great for 4-man content. It applies a heal over time to 3 people. It can also be used in trials in certain scenarios, but it's going to be strongest in 4-man content. Then we have Steadfast Ward. Both morphs could be beneficial, Ward Ally and Healing Ward, but I personally prefer Healing Ward because while the shield is active, it also heals the target, which can be very nice to have on hand. The shield itself actually isn't that bad either, and it gets stronger depending on how much damage a person has taken when you cast the shield. But again, I like Healing Ward more because it does have a small heal over time while the shield is active. So definitely better, in my opinion, than Ward Ally, because with Ward Ally, you're just giving out a straight damage shield rather than healing. So you still need to rely on another ability to heal if you're running Ward Ally, while Healing Ward will heal somebody while they have the shield up. Then you have Force Siphon, both morphs Quick Siphon and Siphon Spirit. They both apply minor lifesteal. Siphon Spirit applies minor Magicka steal, and Quick Siphon gives you minor Expedition when you're healed by the minor lifesteal. Both of them have their uses. Siphon Spirit can be used in place of Eldraine if you have a source of major breach already. Quick Siphon provides minor Expedition. The extra movement speed could come in handy in some fights, but generally speaking, there are better ways to apply minor lifesteal, so this is not an ability you see being used very often in endgame PvE. If you need a shield, run either Morph of Annulment. Doesn't really matter, just pick whichever one you want. If you are running Zens, make sure you're unlocking a lot of these dots, because you will need some dots to make sure you have the Zens debuff going. So Consuming Trap, for example, or Soul Splitting Trap. Under the Mage's Guild line, Entropy and Fire Rune. Let's see, and then under the Anointed line, make sure to have everything unlocked here. Overflowing Altar, you're going to run for the Minor Lifesteal and the Blood Feast synergy. Shadow Soak provides the Black Widow synergy, which is fairly commonly used by Bobo DPS, so definitely consider getting that if you have Bobo DPS. There are going to be some strategies where you will need to taunt things as the healer, so make sure to pick up your ranged taunt in a rage, because you typically won't be using a sword and board, so don't expect to use the sword and board taunt. Then we have Bone Surge for the Major Vitality from the Spinal Surge synergy. Niche case uses here, but very useful. Mostly used in high healing scenarios like Baneful Mark and Execute during Cloud Rest. Those are situations where you might see Bone Surge being run. And obviously Energy Orb. We already covered Energy Orb when we talked about it earlier. Under the Lanceborn line, we already talked about Reviving Barrier being nice, but Efficient Purge is also good to help remove debuffs from your allies. While renewing Undeath does do it, it does require a corpse to do so, so it's not going to be as consistent as Purge. So I do recommend picking up Efficient Purge and running that if you need a cleanse, compared to running Renewing Undeath and hoping you have a corpse active when you need to cleanse. Think about it like in against the first boss in Hoth, where you're going to have to make sure you have a corpse out at all time in order to use Renewing Undeath, when in reality you're going to be using that corpse to get ultimate by running Necrotic Potency. But that pretty much covers all the skills you're going to want to have on hand as a Necromancer healer. So let's go ahead and talk about the general philosophy behind healing in ESO. So healers in ESO kind of have two roles. The first one is healing your allies, making sure nobody dies. And your second role is to basically buff your allies and debuff the enemies. You have a tertiary goal as well, which is just do as much damage as you can. Any additional damage you can provide is going to speed up the fight, which shorter fight times means less damage is outgoing, so you don't need to focus as much on that first job of healing your allies, because they're not going to be taking as much damage. They don't necessarily have to play any sort of mechanics. So good DPS is a good goal to reach for as a healer, but it's not really something I would recommend newer healers focus on. Rather, instead, I would recommend focusing in on staying alive, keeping people alive, and then moving on to buffs and debuffs. The good thing is a lot of your buffing abilities also double as healing abilities, and a lot of buffs and debuffs are provided from your sets as well. So, for example, let's say you're focusing on maintaining Minor Berserk uptime from Combat Prayer. Well, Combat Prayer also has an AoE heal associated with it. So if you're focusing on maintaining Minor Berserk uptime, you're also going to be healing your allies. So, that healing job and the buffing job, they're both combined in this one ability here. Same thing with something like Energy Orb, where you're providing resources to your DPS, directly supporting their ability to do higher DPS by maintaining that light attack rotation. At the same time, Energy Orb also gives out heals as well. So again, you're kind of covering both angles here. You're both healing and you're also buffing your allies. Now, debuffing, most of those don't heal because they're targeted on your enemies, but it is important to maintain your debuffs like Elemental Drain and Blockade of Storms. So, generally speaking, try to maintain your debuffs and buffs as much as you can, but if you find your allies are dying too often, reshift your focus towards, keeping everybody alive, and then once you're comfortable with the fight, once everybody else is comfortable with the fight and they're managing to stay alive, then you can start shifting more towards managing your debuffs, managing your buffs, and so on. It's a little bit hard to explain how to heal without actually showing you guys any sort of healing videos, so I have included down in the description below links to a couple of content creators who do heal. I know Style Animal has healed on a Necromancer, and I believe Tabata has also healed on a Necromancer, so they should have maybe Twitch VODs or YouTube videos of healing from a Necromancer's point of view. So I do recommend checking out those content creators down below for more information and videos on how to heal as a Necromancer. I typically don't heal very often, and when I do heal, it's going to be on a Templar or a Warden, so I don't have a lot of in-raid experience with Necromancer healing. So I do recommend checking out those content creators in the description below. Other than that, that concludes this build of video. If you guys have any questions, feel free to leave them down in the comment section below, but I will probably redirect you towards the content creators that I have in the description, just because they are more experienced in healing than I am. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.